But it is time to hit social media for cash tags. For that, we'd like to welcome in Megan Brantley, the VP of Research at LikeFolio.com, and we have Evelyn Baker alongside us as well here in studio. We're going to be talking some cannabis and some CGC, Canopy Growth in particular.
Right, so we did see a lot of these pot stock names report their earnings last week, and of course a lot of different information came from that. But then yesterday, the House passed a bill to decriminalize marijuana in the U.S. And we know that a lot of these names are Canadian, so we are waiting on what this regulation in our country will mean for these big names. So all of those stocks really rallied yesterday, we saw. But Megan, you're keyed into one name in particular, right?
Yeah, so we were excited to bring this and kind of switch things up this segment. One of the top questions that we get is, what do you guys think about the cannabis industry? What do you guys think about pot stocks? And especially in light of how many of them were just crushed last week with earnings. And what we try to do is we're trying to understand, okay, what's going on in the cannabis industry? How are people consuming pot? How are they purchasing this? Are they purchasing it? Is it accessible? And then are there any potential winners? And so one that we zone in on is Canopy Growth Company. And you can see this purchase intent line. So these are mentions of people who are purchasing a brand or a product owned by Canopy Growth. And they actually have some pretty popular name recognition. The brand Tweed, I think, is a fairly popular brand for them. And what we see is actually an increase year over year from a purchase intent perspective. And why this is relevant is, this is different from some of their competitors. When we look at Tilray, for example, we actually see purchase intent down about 47%. So this isn't a case where all names are outperforming, right? And so I think that it's important to be able to identify which names could be winners in the long run.
Megan, I have a quick question regarding just kind of people talking about this in general. Is there still a stigma around this where people are a little bit more private about this? Or are you seeing just more and more mentions in general of people talking about this and it's more comfortable to talk about?
It's so funny. You would think that, I guess there typically would be a stigma associated, or that was my initial thought, but the mentions on Twitter are actually pretty incredible. We look for mentions of people just talking about consuming marijuana. There's not necessarily an extreme uptick as you would think. It's increasing a little bit, but nothing crazy. But for example, CBD, that is actually absolutely booming. We also see an increase in people talking about going to the dispensary, people talking about the taxes that are placed on weed, people talking about having access or not, maybe the dispensary is too far away. I think that's a common thing. And so really, as we're watching this market get saturated, it's important to note, this chart that you're looking at is consumers who are visiting a dispensary. So I think that initially, whenever marijuana and cannabis was brought to the market, people thought, okay, well, maybe they're still going to buy their weed from their weed man. And we are seeing a willingness for people to actually enter the legal cannabis market. So that's promising long term.
But Megan, isn't the big fundamental problem with weed long term being the fact that demand is being overwhelmed by supply? And every dude that is getting into cannabis and getting into this industry, and now there's too much. There's too much supply. And I think that's what's driving down some of these stock prices. It's just so much competition, so many people getting into it. And until it does get legalized and the banking system can get involved, this is still an industry with a bunch of risk.
Oh, you're absolutely right. We're in the infancy phase of cannabis expansion into the market, and there's still a lot of calibrating that companies have to do. They like you said, they are producing a lot, and what we're actually seeing is there's not as much of an access for consumers to even enter the legal market if they want to. In Canada, for example, I think in Ontario, the CGC on their last earnings call cited that there's only one retail store for every 600,000 people. And so, there's not this initial market share that people thought that there was going to be. And so I think that, it's going to be very volatile in the short term, but long term, I think that there could be a very large market capture for these companies.
Interesting.
Y'all introduced this next tweet perfectly for me. Thank you both very much. This tweet from Stock Pro, he says, every pullback on CGC is an opportunity to buy more. We trade this with a 5 to 10 year payout. Tomorrow sucks, but the future is bright. And he was kind of right. I think he tweeted this yesterday. Today does suck. Today is the yesterday, it's the tomorrow of yesterday, whatever, and those stocks are down
7%
heavily today.
Yeah.
Exactly. So Megan, I'm wondering, with all of this strong consumer purchase intent within CGC, that has to mean good news down the line, right?
We're looking at it. I think that tweet frames it perfectly. It's taken a hit significantly. I mean, it is back up just recently as of late. I think it received a couple of upgrades as well, but we're seeing strength from consumers. We're also seeing a willingness to enter this legal market. So we think that, if people are interested and they're trying to figure out, how do I get involved, this would be a name that maybe wouldn't be as risky as some other names if you wanted to, have a long-term outlook for Canopy Growth.
Megan, so the big story here, and this kind of ties it all together, is this has always been the story. So it's always been, what is this industry going to look like in so many years? But when these stocks like CGC were trading up in the $50 range and Tilray trades $300, there was really no real growth that could ever validate those valuations anytime soon if you were looking at it fundamentally. So it's been a painful trade if you've been in these for a long, long time here, and you've been on an incredible ride. But I think there's much more of an argument to be made that the fundamental picture is at least potentially more in line with realistic expectations at these lower levels. But there is serious concerns about the average net price per gram being down 48% year over year for a Tilray, tying into what Kevin's talking about. But if that's going to happen, you're going to need to see data like you guys are seeing with, over the last 5-10 years here in the people visiting dispensary, looking like it's 10x higher. People looking at Canopy Growth and it being double what it was not that long ago. They're going to need to continue to see that if they're selling their product for less and less, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think it's, like you mentioned, the price of the product is going down and they have to be competitive with the market, right? So I think that there's going to be some calibration to say, okay, how can the legal market actually meet what the illegal market is offering to get consumers to, buy into this legal market?
Really interesting stuff here, Megan. We got to leave it there. Great conversation. We'll see what happens over the next, months and years with this space and who emerges as the winners, if there are any. But Megan, have a great weekend and thanks for joining us.
Thanks, you guys too.
Thanks to you as well, Evelyn. Have a great weekend.